I'm finally going to see my kids and get to give them the life they deserve.
The clouds over the Atlantic looked like piles of cotton wool, but Claraara didn't see beauty. She saw 8 years of double shifts. She saw the rough texture of a nurse's uniform and the smell of antiseptic that had become her second skin in London. In her lap sat a leather-bound planner filled with the names of the schools she would enroll her children in next week. Claraara closed her eyes and leaned back. In her mind, she was already at the gate of the house she'd spent 40 million naira to build. She could hear Naomi's high-pitched laugh and feel Daniel's strong arms around her waist. She had sent every penny. She had lived on crackers and tea so they could live on jollof and chicken. The pilot's voice crackled, announcing their descent into Lagos. Claraara's heart did a somersault. "I'm coming, my babies," she whispered. She had no idea that while she was flying through the heavens, her children were literal steps away from hell. She didn't know that the sister she called her anchor was actually the storm that had wrecked her home. Lagos hit her with a wall of heat and the familiar scent of diesel and roasted corn. Claraara walked through the airport with her head held high. She looked like the success story everyone expected, a Japa queen returning to her kingdom. She loaded a taxi with oversized suitcases, each one bursting with the dreams she had bought in London. "Take me to the address on this paper," she told the driver. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. She wanted to surprise them. She had spent the last week lying to Sandra on the phone, saying she was working overtime. Sandra had laughed, telling her, "The kids are fine, Clara. They are eating us out of house and home. Little Jason even looks like a wrestler now." Claraara had smiled then, grateful for such a devoted sister. Now, as the taxi wove through the thick Lagos traffic, she watched the street hawkers. She felt a twinge of pity for them, young boys and girls weaving through cars with heavy trays. She thanked God her children would never know that life. The traffic light turned red at a busy junction. Claraara looked out the window, watching a group of beggars near the concrete median. A boy, no older than 12, was holding a small plastic bowl. He was so thin his ribs showed through his tattered shirt. His skin was grey with dust, and his feet were bare on the scorching asphalt. Claraara's breath hitched. There was something about the way the boy held his head, something about the slope of his shoulders. He walked up to the car in front of her taxi, his hand outstretched, eyes hollow and pleading. The driver of that car hissed and wound up his window. The boy turned toward Claraara's taxi, their eyes locked. Time didn't just slow down, it stopped. The world went silent. The boy's eyes widened, and a small, cracked voice escaped his parched lips. "Mummy?" Claraara's heart didn't just break, it shattered into a million jagged pieces. "Stop the car!" she screamed. The driver slammed the brakes, and Claraara threw herself out into the chaos of the road. Before we move into the heart of this betrayal, if you believe that a mother's love is the strongest force on earth, please subscribe to Her Shattered Stories. Your support helps us tell the stories of women who have walked through the dark and found their light. Comment below the country you are watching from. We want to know where our sisters are standing with us tonight. Claraara didn't care about the cars honking or the insults from drivers. She ran to the boy and fell to her knees in the middle of the road. She reached out, her hands trembling so hard she could barely touch him. "Daniel, my Daniel!" The boy didn't move at first. He looked at her like she was a dream he was afraid to wake up from. Then a single tear tracked a clean line through the dust on his cheek. "Mummy, you came! You really came!" She pulled him into her chest, ignoring the grime on his clothes and the smell of the street. He was so light, he felt like a bundle of dry sticks. She pulled back to look at his face, her hands mapping his features. "What happened? Where is Sandra? Where are your sisters?" Daniel looked terrified. He glanced toward a nearby alleyway where other children were hiding. Auntie said we must bring 5,000 naira every day or no dinner. Mummy, I'm so hungry. Claraara felt a cold, murderous rage begin to boil in her marrow. This was the boy she had sent 200,000 naira a month for extra lessons and nutrition. Where is Naomi? Claraara's voice was a low, dangerous growl. Daniel pointed toward a group of women selling oranges near the gutter. There, sitting on a rusted stool, was a young girl with a tray of bruised fruit. Her hair was matted and she was squinting in the sun, her lips cracked and bleeding. Claraara stood up and walked toward her. She didn't shout, she didn't scream, she walked with the silence of a lioness. When Naomi saw her, the girl didn't run, she simply stared. Then her tray slipped from her lap and the oranges rolled into the dirty water of the gutter. Mummy, Naomi whispered. She stood up, but her legs were weak. She swayed, and Claraara caught her before she hit the ground. The girl smelled of sweat and rotting citrus. This was the daughter Claraara had bought designer dresses for. This was the princess she thought was living in a mansion of grace. Claraara gathered her 2 children and led them back to the taxi. The driver was speechless. He helped them into the back seat, his eyes moist with pity. Madam, he whispered, I didn't know.
Drive, Clara said. Her voice was like ice. Take us to the house of grace. As the car moved, she looked at her children. They were staring at the suitcases in the trunk, the gifts, the clothes, the toys. To them, those boxes were from another world. Daniel reached out and touched Clara's hand, checking if she was still real. Where is Jason? Clara asked, her heart hammering. Is he on the street too? Daniel shook his head, his eyes filling with fresh tears. Jason stays at the house. Auntie says he's too small to sell oranges, so she makes him scrub the floors. Mommy, he cries every night for you. Clara closed her eyes. She thought of the 8 years of London rain, the cold nights, the aching back. It had all been a lie. To understand the depth of this wound, we have to go back to that humid day at the British High Commission 8 years ago. Clara and Sandra had stood in the same line, 2 sisters, 1 heart. Clara was the older one, the protector. Sandra was the baby, the one Clara always shielded. When the officer called Clara's name and stamped approved on her visa, Clara had hugged Sandra so tight. But when Sandra's turn came, the officer had shaken his head, denied. Clara had offered to stay. I won't go if you can't go, Sandra, she had said. But Sandra had wiped her eyes and smiled, a smile that Clara now realized was the first mask of a monster. No, sister, go and make a way for us. I will stay here and be the mother to your children. I will protect them like they are my own blood. That was the day the poison was planted. While Clara was packing her bags with hope, Sandra was packing her heart with a jealousy that would eventually burn everything to the ground. In London, Clara became a ghost. She lived in a tiny room that smelled of dampness. She worked 16-hour shifts, sometimes 20. She would come home with swollen feet and call Sandra on WhatsApp. How are they, Sandra? She would ask, her voice thick with exhaustion. Oh, they are wonderful, Sandra would reply, tilting the camera to show the children in a brightly lit room. They would be wearing clean clothes, sitting in front of a television. Say hi to Mommy, Sandra would hiss under her breath. The children would wave, their smiles tight and rehearsed. Clara thought it was just the distance, making them awkward. She didn't see the hand Sandra kept on their shoulders, pinching them if they moved too much. She didn't see the empty plates just out of the camera's frame. She didn't see that the house of grace was actually a house of horrors. The fire in Clara's soul was no longer a flicker. It was a consuming blaze. As the taxi turned into the street she had funded for years, the children huddled together in the back seat, trembling. The taxi stopped in front of a towering black gate. Above it, scrawled in elegant gold letters, was the sign, Times House of Grace. It was a beautiful house, cream-colored walls, expensive stone cladding, and lush palm trees lining the driveway. It was exactly what Clara had pictured in her cold London flat. But as she looked at Daniel's scarred wrists and Naomi's hollow eyes, the house looked like a tomb. Stay in the car, Clara told the driver. She didn't wait for him to open the door. She stepped out, her movements precise and lethal. She didn't ring the bell. She pounded on the iron gate with both fists. "Sandra, open this gate," she roared. Her voice carried down the street, causing neighbors to peek over their fences. A small, frightened face appeared at the gate's peephole. It was a security guard Clara didn't recognize, a man whose salary she had likely been paying. "Who is that?" he asked. "I am the owner of this house," Clara hissed. "Open it before I tear it down with my bare hands." Something in her eyes made the man's blood run cold. He fumbled with the locks and the heavy iron swung open. Clara marched in, the dust of the road still on her expensive London coat, a storm ready to break. Clara bypassed the manicured lawn and kicked open the front door. The interior was cool, smelling of expensive lilies and floor wax. In the center of the living room sat a boy about 14. He was plump, wearing a brand new football jersey and holding a high-end tablet. This was Samson, Sandra's only son. On the table in front of him was a feast, jollof rice piled high, fried plantains, and a large piece of roasted chicken. He didn't even look up at first. "Auntie Naomi, bring me more juice," he shouted, his voice dripping with spoiled command. Clara felt a physical pain in her chest. Her daughter, her firstborn girl, was a servant to this boy. She walked over to the table and with one swift motion, swept the plate of food onto the polished marble. Samson jumped up, screaming in shock. "Who are you? You broke my dinner." "I am the woman who paid for that rice," Clara said, her voice a low, terrifying silk. "And I am the woman who is going to end this kingdom of lies." Samson stared at her, frozen. He had seen her on the phone screens, but this woman was a giant, a goddess of vengeance he didn't recognize. "Samson, who is making that noise?" A voice floated down from the balcony. It was a honeyed voice, the one that comforted Clara across thousands of miles. Sandra appeared at the top of the stairs, wearing a silk robe and a shimmering lace wig, her skin glowing with the expensive creams Clara had sent from Boots and Superdrug. Sandra looked down, a smile of annoyance on her face, until she saw Clara. The wine glass didn't just fall, it shattered. The red liquid splattered across the white stairs like a fresh wound. "Clara?" Sandra's voice was a ghost of itself. Her face went from bronze to an ashen grey. She clutched the railing, her knuckles turning white. You didn't tell me. I thought you were working." "I was working, Sandra. I was working while you were selling my children. I was working while you were starving my blood. I was working while you built this temple to your envy." Sandra corrected herself faster than a snake. She smoothed her silk robe and began to descend the stairs, a fake fluttering laugh escaping her lips. "Sister, you surprised us. Why are you talking like this? You've clearly had a long flight. The heat has touched your head." She reached the bottom and tried to move toward Clara. A hand as gesture so sharp stopped Sandra in her tracks. "Don't touch me. Don't even breathe the same air as me. Where is Jason?" Sandra's eyes flickered toward the kitchen. He's napping, Clara. He's been a bit sickly. You know how children are." "Liar," a voice cracked through the room. Daniel and Naomi had followed their mother into the house. They stood in the doorway, two shadows of misery in a room of gold. Naomi pointed toward the laundry area behind the kitchen. "He's in the dark room, Mommy. She locked him there because he broke a plate." Sandra turned on the children, her face contorting into the mask they knew so well. "Shut your mouth, you little beggars." But the moment the word beggars left her lips, Clara's hand connected with Sandra. The slap echoed like a gunshot. The betrayal is reaching its peak. If you've ever felt the sting of a family member's envy, or if you're rooting for Clara to reclaim her children, please subscribe to Her Shattered Stories now. We tell these stories so no woman has to feel alone in her pain. Comment below, what would you do if you found your sister treating your children this way? We are reading every comment from the USA to the UK to Africa. Claraara didn't wait for Sandra to recover. She ran toward the back of the house, following Naomi's lead. They reached a small, windowless pantry near the outdoor kitchen. There was a heavy wooden bar across the door. Claraara ripped it away, her strength fueled by a mother's desperation. Inside, the room was sweltering and smelled of damp earth. In the corner, sitting on a threadbare mat, was a 5-year-old boy. He was holding a plastic toy car with no wheels. His eyes were wide, blinking against the sudden intrusion of light. "Jason?" Claraara whispered. The boy didn't move. He didn't know her. He had been 3 when she left. She was just a face on a flickering screen that usually brought him more slaps from Auntie. Claraara scooped him up, and his small body was so hot with fever it burnt her arms. He whimpered, trying to pull away. "It's okay, baby. It's Mommy. I'm here. I'm never leaving again." She held him to her heart, feeling the rapid, shallow beat of a child who had forgotten what safety felt like. When Claraara walked back into the living room, holding Jason, Sandra was standing by the sofa, clutching her bruised cheek. Samson was crying in the corner, confused by the sudden collapse of his world. "You think you are so holy," Sandra spat, her voice cracking with years of suppressed hatred. "You left them, Claraara. You went to London to play big madam. You sent money, yes, but who was here? Who dealt with the thieving? Who dealt with the tantrums? I sacrificed my youth for your children." "You didn't sacrifice, Sandra. You stole," Claraara replied, her voice eerily calm. "I sent money for school fees. My children haven't seen a classroom in 2 years. I sent money for meat and milk. They have been eating scraps while your son gets fat. I sent money for this house and you turned it into a prison for my blood." "I deserved this life," Sandra screamed, her face twisting. "We grew up in the same house, but you were always the lucky one, the smart one, the one who got the visa. I just took what the universe owed me." The commotion had drawn a cloud. Neighbors were standing at the open gate, and among them was Uncle Mike, the fruit seller from the market. He stepped forward, his eyes fixed on Sandra with deep disgust. "She's telling the truth, Madam Claraara," Uncle Mike said, his voice loud enough for the whole street to hear. "We all saw it. We saw the children selling in the sun while she drove a car you bought. We heard the screams at night. We tried to help, but she threatened to call the police on us, saying she had connections." Sandra looked at the crowd, her eyes wild. She realized the narrative was slipping. She looked at the house, the furniture, the silk robe she was wearing. It was all dissolving. "Get out!" she screamed at the neighbors. "This is a family matter." "This stopped being a family matter the moment you stand a child," Claraara said. She handed the feverish Jason to Daniel and reached into her handbag. She pulled out a thick envelope of documents, the original deeds, the receipts, the proof of every transfer. "The war has just begun, Sandra, and by the time I'm done, you won't even have a mat to sleep on." Claraara's heart was a drum of war. She looked at the marble floor she had paid for and saw only the blood of her children's innocence. She knew that staying in that house one more night would be like sleeping in a den of cobras. Claraara didn't wait for the police. She didn't wait for an apology that would never be sincere. She gathered her 3 children and told the taxi driver to load the bags back into the car. "We are leaving," she said, her voice echoing through the hollow luxury of the living room. Sandra stood in the middle of the foyer, her expensive silk robe now stained with the wine she had dropped. "You can't take them. This is my house. My name is on the secondary papers," she shrieked. Samson sat on the stairs crying for his mother, but Claraara didn't look back. She took them to the only place she knew was safe, the home of Aunt Rose, a retired school teacher who had known their mother. When Aunt Rose saw the children, she let out a cry that shook the neighborhood. She didn't ask questions. She immediately put a pot of water on the stove and began to wash the street grime of Jason's feverish body. That night, for the first time in 8 years, Claraara slept on a thin mattress on the floor, sandwiched between her 3 children. They held onto her clothes as if she might evaporate into the morning mist. The next morning, Claraara didn't cry. A nurse knows that you must stop the bleeding before you can heal the wound. She sat at Aunt Rose's kitchen table and opened her life folder. In London, she had been meticulous. She had every Western Union receipt, every bank transfer slip, and every WhatsApp message where Sandra had asked for extra money for Daniel's private piano lessons. She called Mr. Adeyemi, a lawyer known for his iron will. When she walked into his office, she didn't look like a victim. She looked like an accountant for the day of judgment. She laid the papers out one by one. "I sent 150 million naira over 8 years," Claraara said. "The house is in my name, but Sandra handled the local registration. My children were used as child laborers while I funded her boutique." Mr. Adeyemi looked at the photos of the children in the market, the photos Uncle Mike had sent. He adjusted his glasses and leaned back. "Madam, we are not just going to sue her, we are going to dismantle her." Sandra was not going down without a fight. She knew the power of a lie. She went to the local marketplace and began telling the traders that Claraara had gone mad in London. She claimed that Claraara had abandoned the children for years and only returned to steal the house Sandra had worked so hard to maintain. "She's a stranger to them," she cried to anyone who would listen. "I am the one who stayed. I am the one who raised them." She even tried to visit the children at Aunt Rosie's house, bringing a bag of cheap sweets. But when Daniel saw her at the gate, he didn't run for the candy. He stood tall, shielding Naomi and Jason behind his thin frame. "Go away, Auntie," his voice cracking but firm. "The oranges are finished. We are not selling for you anymore." Sandra's face contorted into a mask of pure evil. "You ungrateful brat," she whispered, so only he could hear. "When your mother goes back to London, I will make you eat the dust of this earth. The battle for justice is heating up and Claraara needs your energy. If you believe that truth always triumphs over darkness, hit that subscribe button for her shattered stories. We are a community built on the strength of women. Comment below the country you are watching from. Whether you are in Atlanta, London, or Lagos, your voice matters here." Word of the upcoming court case spread like wildfire. Sandra thought she had bought the silence of the neighborhood with her flashy parties and donations to the local church. She didn't realize that people have long memories for cruelty. One by one, people began to visit Mr. Adeyemi's office. A neighbor from 2 houses down brought a recording of Sandra screaming at Naomi at 3 a.m. because the laundry wasn't finished. A teacher from the local school came forward to testify that she had sent several letters about the children's absence, only for Sandra to show up and threaten her. But the most powerful witness was Uncle Mike. He brought the very tray that Naomi had dropped in the dirt the day she fainted. "I kept it," Uncle Mike said, his eyes wet with tears. "I kept it because I knew one day a mother would come looking for her fruit. I didn't know the fruit would be so bitter." Claraara held the dusty tray and wept. It was the physical evidence of her daughter's stolen childhood. The day of the hearing arrived. The courtroom was packed. On one side sat Sandra, dressed in a flamboyant lace outfit, flanked by a lawyer who looked like he had been paid in stolen money. On the other side sat Clara, wearing her nurse's cardigan, her children sitting behind her, clean and quiet. The judge, a woman with eyes like flint, called for order. Sandra's lawyer stood up first, painting a picture of a dedicated sister who had been overwhelmed by the burden of 3 children while the mother enjoyed the luxuries of the West. He talked about the sacrifice of managing a large property. Then Mr. Adeyemi stood up. He didn't speak at first. He simply took a laptop and projected a video onto the wall. It was the footage from a neighbor's security camera. It showed Daniel, aged 10, carrying a 50 kg bag of cement on his head to help with the construction of Sandra's boutique, while Sandra sat nearby, fanning herself with a stack of naira notes. The silence in the courtroom was so heavy you could hear the heartbeat of the person next to you. The shattered story was finally being pieced back together. The courtroom was silent, a heavy blanket of anticipation resting over every soul. This wasn't just a legal proceeding, it was an exorcism of an 8-year-old demon. The judge looked at the small girl standing in the witness box. Naomi's feet barely touched the floor, and she was wearing a simple cotton dress Clara had bought her only days ago. The lawyer for Sandra tried to object, claiming the children were coached, but the judge silenced him with a single sharp look. "Naomi," the judge said softly, "tell me about the oranges." Naomi looked at her mother, who nodded with tears in her eyes. The girl turned back to the judge. "The son was always angry," she began, her voice small but steady. "Auntie said if we didn't sell the whole tray, we were wasters. One day I was so dizzy I saw my mommy's face in the clouds and I reached for her. The tray fell. Auntie didn't ask if I was hurt. She told me the dirt on the oranges would be the only thing I ate that night." A gasp rippled through the gallery. Sandra tried to stand, her face a mask of fake outrage, but the court bailiff pushed her back into her seat. Naomi continued, describing the dark room, the cold water, and how they had to watch Samson eat cake while they chewed on bone. By the time she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room except for Sandra's. Sandra's lawyer tried one last desperate move. Your Honor, my client was a single woman managing a massive estate. Stress leads to mistakes. The judge leaned forward, her eyes like polished obsidian. Stress leads to a short-temper, counselor. It does not lead to the systematic starvation and enslavement of children, while the mother's hard-earned money is used to buy silk and stone. She turned her gaze to Sandra. You didn't just steal money, Sandra Williams. You stole the safety of a mother's heart. You turned a house of grace into a monument of greed. The judge didn't hesitate. She ordered the immediate arrest of Sandra for child endangerment, fraud, and embezzlement. Every asset, the house, the boutique, the cars, was to be liquidated or transferred back to Clara. As the handcuffs clicked around Sandra's wrist, the big madame finally broke. She didn't scream for her sister, she screamed for her jewelry. 3 days later, Clara stood at the gates of the house once more. The gold sign, Times House of Grace, was gone, ripped down by the neighbors who were ashamed they hadn't intervened sooner. Clara didn't move in immediately. She hired a team to strip the house. She gave away every piece of furniture Sandra had touched. She burned the silk robes and the lace wigs. I don't want her ghost in here, she told Aunt Rose. She repainted the walls a soft, healing blue, the color of the London sky she had stared at while dreaming of this home. As she scrubbed the floors herself, the same floors little Jason had been forced to clean, she felt a release. The house was no longer a trophy of envy, it was becoming a sanctuary of recovery. She set up a room for Daniel with books and a computer, a room for Naomi with a bed that felt like a cloud, a playroom for Jason where the only dark room was for sleeping and dreaming of heroes. We have reached the final chapters of this shattered story. If you believe that no woman should ever have her sacrifice turned into a weapon against her, please subscribe to her Shattered Stories and hit the notification bell. Before we reveal the fate of the two sisters, comment your country below. Let's see which nation stands strongest for justice tonight. There was one piece of the wreckage left. Samson. With his mother in a prison cell, the 14-year-old boy was a prince without a throne. He sat on the curb outside the house, his fancy football jersey now stained and wrinkled. He had no friends. His mother had taught him to look down on everyone, and now everyone looked past him. Clara stood at the doorway watching him. This was the boy who had watched her children starve. This was the boy who called her daughter a servant. Part of her wanted to shut the gate and let him wander the streets as her children had. But as she looked at him, she saw the same thing she saw in her own children, a victim of Sandra's poison. Samson, Clara called out, "Come inside, there is rice on the stove." He hesitated, then walked towards her, his head bowed. Clara realized that the ultimate justice wasn't just taking back her house, it was breaking the cycle of hatred. She would raise him, but he would learn the value of a day's work. He would learn that grace is earned, not stolen. 8 months later, the house of truth was full of life. Daniel was the top of his class. Naomi's laughter had returned to its high-pitched chime. And Jason was healthy, his cheeks round and glowing. Clara didn't go back to London. She used a portion of her reclaimed funds to start a foundation for street children named after Uncle Mike. Every Sunday, they would sit on the porch. Clara, her 3 children, and a much humbled Samson. They were a family of scars, but scars are just proof that the skin has healed. Clara looked at the camera of her life and realized that her story wasn't shattered anymore. It was a mosaic. To every woman watching, to every mother working 2 jobs, to every sister being betrayed, hold on to your receipts. Hold on to your truth. The sun might be cruel today, but the reign of justice is coming. This has been her Shattered Stories. Thank you for walking through the fire with us. We will see you in the next story of pain, betrayal, and the ultimate triumph of the soul.